Origins of World War II is a game that I picked up completely by chance. I saw it at a Red Cross book sale a couple of years ago. It's a bookcase game, so I guess that's how it ended up there. And I asked $2 for it, so I thought, what the heck. And it was also on Punch when I picked it up, so that made me very happy. Origins of World War II is a game originally published by Avalon Hill in 1971. It's older than me, if you can believe it. And it depicts the political diplomatic struggle in the Western world during the 30s of the last century. So during the period that led up to the breakout of World War II. It plays from 2 to 5 players, but not really. This is a 5-player game. You really need 5 players for the game to be all that it can be. And these players represent major political forces of the time. You have the United States, the Soviet Union, French, Britain, and Germany. And each has a different set of objectives that they're trying to accomplish. This is a game that I think is very underrated and not well known enough, which is also one of the reasons why I'm making this video. Also, it is a game that I enjoyed playing with my friends. I enjoyed just playing it with other gamers. But these days I'm teaching a class at Indiana University about war and representation of war in fiction. And I thought that as we are talking about World War II, watching movies about the subject, we just finished reading The Thin Red Line. I thought it would also be interesting to have a game that depicts World War II in the West from the political point of view, to a way with the students to understand the motivations that led to that war. A good thing with a game such as this one is that you need 5 players, yes, but actually what it means really is that you need at least 5 players, because if you have a large class, then you simply can divide the class in 5 groups, then each group is a small government and they have to work together to decide the strategy. In a sense that also works very well. I would say even adds a little bit of realism when you have members within a government that don't really agree on what to do next. So I'm going to tell about the game in general, then I'm going to tell you my experience with the game as a gamer and also as a teacher who included Origins of World War II in his class. The game is played on this mounted board here, which represents Europe, and it has a box to represent the United States. The map is divided in countries like Britain, France. The gray areas are not playable. And then you have 2 regions, the Alsace-Lorraine and the Rhineland, which for all intent and purposes count as independent areas, just like Germany, Italy, or France. You have the rules of play, very important. It's hard to play without those. Very short rules, as they are printed on a single sheet of paper. The rules are pretty much this, this, and this. And then on the other side of the sheet you have this section here, which also is rules. The rest is variants, optional rules, how to play the game with less than 5 players, how to play by mail. Yes, by mail, not by email. Back in the day. Can you believe it? People managed to do that. So, very short rules and very easy to understand. National objective charts. You have a set of 5 national objective charts. You give 1 to each player at the beginning of the game. These charts are going to be your best enemy, your best friend and worst enemy during the game. I'll tell you more about the charts later. For now, I want to point out that there's a set for the historical game. You use the set if you want to relive history or to try to correct the mistakes that were made in history. But you also have charts for what-if scenarios. So there's a set of 5 charts, and you will use this section here, this player aid, if you want to test what could have happened with an aggressive French policy, aggressive French and British policy, anti-Bolshevik crusade, and aggressive British-US alliance. This also, of course, increases the replay value of the game quite a bit. You have a booklet with the designer's notes about the era of diplomacy. Very laudable component, laudable addition to the game. And then you have counters. Each player has a set of counters, such as this one. And now the counters don't start on the board. There's nothing on the board at the beginning of the game. These counters represent political factors. So some of those counters simply have numbers, and they represent the amount of political factors that the counter is worth. And you can give change. There's no conceptual difference. You can exchange 2 5 political factors for a 10-1, or 3 and 3, and 3 and 1 for 10. It's just like currency. You also have understanding markers. This will indicate that you have a good understanding, a good diplomatic relationship with a country in which you place such marker. And in many cases, you will try to strike understanding agreements with many countries. Each understanding marker is worth 5 points. So there is a phase in the turn in which you can convert 5 points of your political factors in another country into an understanding with that country. Control markers work similarly, not exactly. A control marker also is worth 5 political factors, which means you may be able during a turn to convert a 5 political factor marker into a control marker, but in order to do so, no other player must have markers of any kind in that country. So you need to have at least 5 political factors in a country. No one else is there. Then you can gain control of that country, and once control is achieved by a country, it cannot be lost. So other players cannot place markers and cannot scheme in that country or about that country anymore. Now, how does this work? Each turn you have, the rulebook doesn't say that, but that's how we played. We have a negotiation diplomacy phase in which players simply talk to each other, small groups leave the room, and agreements are made. They may or may not be very good, they may or may not last long, but that's when players share ideas and possible objectives and courses of actions, and they commit to a certain course of action, even though the agreements that you make during the diplomacy/negotiation phase are not binding by any means. Each player has a different set of objectives that he or she is trying to achieve, and during the diplomacy phase you're trying to further your interests and make sure that you work together with other players so that you can get your objectives and they don't. That's the tricky slippery slope of diplomacy. The United States interests are represented by this column here. The French player is trying to achieve these objectives, and each other player the objectives in their column. Now, these letters, ignore the numbers for now. These letters indicate, let's start from here, NU, no nation has an understanding in the nation indicated, and C, no nation has a control counter. So these are the objectives that you're trying to push in during the game, and this is the chart that will be used to tally points at the end of the game. At the end of the game, you look at the map, you look at the political situation, and if the political situation matches what you're trying to achieve in that country, then you score the amount of points related to that particular objective. For example, if at the end of the game no one has control of Austria, the United States player scores 2 victory points. If no one has control of the Baltic states, then the United States scores 4 victory points. As you can see, this factors in the political objectives of each country. The United States are trying to help these crazy Europeans to maintain balance, so they're trying to prevent countries from taking control of other countries, and countries from striking agreements that may turn dangerous later. C, it means that in that area or in that country you're trying to achieve control, you're trying to place a control marker there, which means at the end of a turn you need to have 5 points there, nobody's there, then you can convert those 5 points into a control marker. So for example, France is trying to retain control of Alsace-Lorraine, by the end of the game, and it is trying to get a good net of alliances, of understanding with other countries. U means that you score the amount of points in that line by having an understanding counter in that area at the end of the game. So again, for example, the British player will score 2 points if he has an understanding with Czechoslovakia, 6 points with an understanding in France, 3 with Germany, and so on and so forth. Trying to be peaceful, as you can see, or trying to conquer the world. The Russian player, well, is trying to create a net of diplomatic alliances with some of the European powers, but really would not mind expanding towards the west by taking control of the Baltic states, of Poland and Romania. And Germany, we know Germany. Do I have to explain what Germany was trying to achieve at this time? Grab it all, grab as much of the cake as you can, strike some minor understanding, but that's not really all that worthy for Germany. Really, Germany is trying to control the world. That's pretty much what this table tells you. Already you can see that simply because of the fact that players are trying to achieve these conditions, players will be forced to, not necessarily to act along historical lines, even though to an extent that is what happens, but is to think along historical lines. They will be presented with the challenges that the countries and the governments of the time were presented with. Now, after players have negotiated, have done their deals, it's time to actually start acting and see if those deals will be respected or broken. Players allocate political factors to the map. Here's the calendar, the schedule of points that each player receives and must place on the board in each turn. The game lasts 6 turns. In turn 1, the United States received 2 political points, France 4, Britain 8, Russia 6, and Germany 12. So what you do, simply you suppose I'm France now, then it's turn 1, I receive 4 points. You simply grab counters representing the amount of points that you receive, and you allocate them on the map. You cannot place them in areas that the players are controlling, but you can place them in your own home country, in other players' home country. Suppose that here I want to place 3 points there and a point here. You can also place points in your own home country, and then during the allocation phase, when new points are added to the map, then you can move points out from your own country to other areas. This is the only case in the game in which you're moving political factors from one area to the other. Otherwise, once they land in a place, they stay there until the end of the game or until they are removed because somebody has achieved control of that area. After everybody has allocated their new points and potentially moved points from their home country to other areas, you have the next phase in the turn, which is the battle phase, the attack phase. But since this is not exactly a military confrontation, I prefer to think of it as starting a diplomatic conflict. You're trying to expand your influence in another country or to strengthen your political influence in your own country, or trying to make somebody else look bad by reducing their influence in a country. I like to think of this as starting a diplomatic conflict. Look, the table also says that that's what it's called, but the rule says attacking. I don't know, I'm not entirely keen on that word. But how does it work? Well, in all areas where more than one player has political factors, a conflict may be started. Again, things happen in turn order. The United States first chooses whether or not to start conflicts in any of the areas in which the United States player has points and another player also has points. Then France gets to conduct possible attacks, Britain, Russia, and Germany. Attacking is never mandatory. But if you do choose to attack, you have to attack all of the points of an opponent. So, for example, here, suppose that it was 3 German points versus 2 French points, then Germany has to take on both of the French points. You may even attack multiple players at the same time. So, for example, if this is the situation, we have 2 French political factors, so 1 American political factors. Germany could choose to attack the United States only, or France only, or all of them combined. Of course, if you attack all of them combined, then you may reduce enemy influence in an area faster, but it is also more dangerous, it may be less effective. You can take on your enemies one at a time, but then it takes longer to gain a significant advantage in an area. How do you resolve conflict? Super simple. You compute the odds between the attacker and the attacked. The attacker needs to be at least at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you have 2 points, you cannot attack 5 or 6 or whatever. You cannot attack more than 2. But here, Germany could attack the United States only at a 3-to-1 ratio, or France only at 3-to-2, which for all intents and purposes means 1-to-1, because you drop fractions. You look at the column corresponding to the odds of the situation that you're resolving, you roll a die and you cross-reference the result with the column, and the results may be D, the defending player removes all of his political factors, A, the attacking player removes all of his political factors, X, exchange, the defending player removes all of his factors and the attacking player removes an equal amount of factors. This result means nothing happens. After all players have had a chance of resolving conflicts, and these conflicts had been resolved, then players, again in turn order, starting from the US player and going towards the Germany player, can convert counters that show a 5 into an understanding marker, and can convert a 5 or more a group of 5 or more political factors in a country where no one else is. They can convert that into a control. However, important thing, you can achieve understanding or control only in countries where that will score you points at the end of the game. So you can put political factors anywhere you want, you simply cannot convert them into an understanding marker unless you're called for, unless you have the option of scoring points by doing that. You cannot convert your own political factors into a control marker unless it is one of your objectives. Again, it is very important to play markers also in areas where you do not have direct interest, because a very important strategy in this game is to weaken the opponent's attempts to reach their objectives. You need to score points, but also to win the game you need to reduce the player's capability to score points, which you do by getting in their way in countries that do not benefit you directly, but may benefit you indirectly. This is the game. You repeat the procedure 6 times. Oh, actually, another important thing is that if you have an agreement with another player, suppose Germany has placed an understanding marker in France, then the player that has that agreement in their country cannot attack the other country's interests abroad. So, for example, if Germany has reached an understanding with France, now France cannot attack German political points outside of France. But the French player could choose to attack the understanding marker and any other German markers that may be there. So basically now you're working on internal policy and diplomacy, and you're simply trying to reduce the influence of that country in your own country, so that then you may be allowed to act against that other country again. So in this case, if France wanted to reduce the presence of Germany in the Rhineland, we still first need to reduce the German influence in France to the point that there's not an understanding marker anymore, and then subsequently would be able to start working against that presence. So it can be very powerful to force an agreement on an opponent so the opponent cannot attack you as easily. You repeat the procedure turn after turn: diplomacy, allocation of points, struggle, and conversion of counters 6 times. At the end of the 6th turn, you tally points based on the objectives that each player has achieved based on the national objective chart that is being used, and at that point the player with the highest amount of points is the winner of the game. This really is an underrated game. I think it should be more well known and more played, because I think that people would really enjoy it. It is a game that has aged incredibly well, and evidence to me is in the fact that I was playing it. I was directing a game with students that were born in the late 90s, so completely different sensibility and taste from the players that played this game in the 70s, and yet they were completely engaged. The rules are easy to teach, easy to absorb, even for non-gamers like some of my students are, and the students were incredibly engaged. The game is very thematic, the objectives are clear, but the way to get there is not. And that made them really involved, because they wanted to figure out how to strike a deal with the country, how to achieve that objective, how to trick this or that player, or this or that country. There really is a lot of thinking that can be done, but it's not as in going through a complicated procedural rules, so that gives you a headache at the end. It is complexity that is fun and challenging. It is riddles and puzzles that are very, very engaging to interact with, to deal with, to try to solve. We played the game, I would say, in about an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes, and that included me teaching the game, and then the students playing the game as I was directing things, making comments. They asked questions about the historical background. We had micro conversations about that during the game. This in about 90 minutes. This really makes this game excellent for a classroom situation. If you have a short amount of time with your students and you still want to expose your students to this game, then you can ask them to read the rules in advance. You can set up the game beforehand, which, come to think of it, doesn't really take much. You simply need to open the board. But I guess there are ways of shortening the game, and it is a game that then lends itself to have interesting conversations about it afterwards, to analyze the board, how things could have gone in one way or the other, what strategies could have worked better. As I said, it's a game that has very clear objectives, but it's fun to try to figure out a way to get there, as everybody else is trying, of course, to get their objectives. Diplomacy is key. Especially if you are not the German player, but even if you're the German player and you're just playing it as a lonely madman, Germany is a behemoth, has so much power and goes last, which gives Germany a big advantage. Even in that case, if the German player just wants to attack in all directions, he may look good on the board, meaning you see there are a lot of territories that the German player controls, but the player really needs to score a lot of points to win, because many of those objectives that the German player can achieve easily do not score as many points as some key objectives of the other countries. Some other countries have some very heavy, profitable objectives, which can be grabbed easily, but that also means they can be taken away easily, so that the players may go for the quick grab of a very rewarding objective, but then they need to be careful about that. So even the German player needs to work with other players to an extent, and then probably to break the deals that were made earlier. But for the other players, it is definitely key to work together to stop or slow down the expansion of the German power, which is just overwhelming. The game is very thematic, and to me that is a plus, because I like thematic games. I guess that in the long run some players can see this as a minus, because that may hinder replay value, but then you have all of the what if scenarios that you can play, and then the game becomes fresh again. Very thematic, very asymmetrical. Each country plays differently. Again, just play 5 games in which you're a different player. You will see completely different perspectives on the war, on the events, and on the game. Not all sides are equally fun to play. Germany is always a treat, but you need a somewhat aggressive play. If you have a meek player playing Germany, I don't know, just play something else. Why would you ever play a game about Origins of World War II with a nice, kind, polite, shy Germany in the 30s? No. Diplomatic game, much more easy to get started with and to play, much more manageable than, say, Diplomacy or other complex games. Because it lasts less, the rules are so simple, and precisely because the core rules is so simple, then the stress of the game is on the diplomacy, on the negotiation, on the conversation, on the lies, on the promises, and the break of the above mentioned promises. It is about the human interaction. And it is great to have a game that has such balance, minimalistic rules, and great interactive experience. I really like Origins of World War II. It can be played in so many different ways. It can be played by email. This way, the negotiations are secret, meaning not only do you not know what players are saying, but not even which players are talking to which other players. So many ways in which it can be played. Can be played solo. I just can't see a way of this game working effectively as a solitaire game, but other than this is a great game. You can easily find all copies online. I recommend you pick one up. It's just really satisfying, rewarding game to play. I still hope that somebody picks up this game for a new edition. I think if the map was redone a little bit, polished to look, to meet contemporary aesthetic standards. There's also an expansion, a Pacific expansion. I think that the new edition of this game with the Pacific expansion would be a hit. I hope that somebody picks it up. If it's a new company, they can figure out how to get the rights from for the game. Maybe somebody will kickstart it. If you kickstart this game, feel free to use this video that I'm making right now as your preview, because I wholeheartedly endorse this game, and I will wholeheartedly endorse anybody that would work towards a reprint of Origins of World War II, and that will try to bring this game to more people, because this game is really fun.